Hello again, Year 8. I hope you guys are doing well. In today's video, we're going to be continuing with our topic of fractions, decimals, and percentages. And in particular, we're going to be continuing to work with decimals. And in particular, we want to actually do some computations with decimals. So the three things we want to do by the end of today's lesson is to be able to add and subtract decimals, multiply with decimals, and also divide with decimals. So here, let's start. Let's just do a quick recap of what we looked at in the last lesson. Last lesson, we started talking about decimals and how they represented numbers that are smaller than 1. And in particular, we could also, there's just another way of rewriting numbers like fractions. And we could compare decimals, and we also worked on converting from fractions to decimals and back again. Today, we're going to actually do some work and doing some of our regular adding, subtracting, and multiplying and dividing with decimals. So let's start off with adding and subtracting decimals. So when you're adding and subtracting decimals, the thing that you want to do, so we're going to do regular addition that you would normally do with regular whole numbers. So we would line up our numbers, for example, and then you would just add each each digit starting from the right. So we start from our smallest place value all the way, and we move to our left. And so here, that's what we're going to do here with decimals. But there's two things we want to make sure. So the first thing, make sure you align the decimal point. So we want to make sure that our decimal point is in the same place for all of the numbers that we're either adding or subtracting using this method. The second thing that we want to do is then also align each, align the digits with the same place value. So once we've done that, we just want to make sure all the numbers with the same place value are lined up together. If they're not lined up together, we're not going to be able to accurately add or subtract our decimals. So let's have a go at a few examples of this. The first one here, we're going to be adding. So here we're adding and subtracting decimals. We're going to go through this first example where we're adding 3 decimals together. Okay, so let's have a go at this one. We're adding 23.07, 103.659, and 9.9. So when we're adding these decimals, what we want to do is we want to firstly align our decimal point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write all of my numbers here. So I'm going to write 23.07. And then here we're going to just align my decimal point. So I'm going to put the dots underneath like that. Then we're going to also make sure that we align all of our digits with the same place value. So the next number was 103.659. Now the great thing here is I've got my grid book kind of setup here. So if you're using a grid book, this is going to be perfect and quite nice for you. You can just put one number in each box and you can actually align it really easily. So here I'm going to write 103.659. If you don't have a grid book, you're just going to need to make sure that you actually align each of those digits correctly. So here, notice my tens match up, my units match up, my tenths match up, my hundredths match up, like so. Okay, and the last number that I have is 9.9. So let me just line them up. 9.9. Okay. Now for these ones, I'm going to add them all together. I'm adding here. So I'm going to put an add in the bottom right just to remind me that I'm adding. Okay, so what we do here is we start from the first digit to the right and then we move to our left. Okay, so what I have here is I'm starting in my thousandths column. Now, if you have a look here, I've got a 9 that's by itself and there's no numbers above it or below it. If there's no numbers above it or below it, that means those are zeros. So here, when I add this, I'm just going to have 9. Nice and easy. Okay, then I'm going to keep moving towards the left. So in the next decimal place, or next decimal place, we've got 7 and 5. I'm just going to add those two. Now, 7 plus 5 will give me 12. So I'm just going to write a 2 here, and I'm going to carry the 10 over into the next decimal point. So I'm going to write 1 here just to remind me that I've carried over. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to add all of these. So 1 plus 6 plus 9. Now 1 plus 6 will give me 7, plus 9 will give me 16. So once again, I'm just going to write the 6 from my 16 and carry the 10 over to the next digit. So here, 16. I'm going to write my decimal point here. I'm going to carry that 1, and I'm just going to add again. So 1 plus 3 plus 3 plus 9. That will give me, 1 plus 3 gives me 4. 4 plus 3 gives me 7. 7 plus 9 gives me 16 again. Okay, cool. So I'm going to have a 6 here. Carry the 1 and continue. So 1 plus 2 will give me 3. And the last one is 1. So here my final answer is 136.629. And we can check that with my calculator. So here I can put this in my calculator, just check. 23.07 plus 103.659 plus 9.9 136.629, which is exactly what I got here. Okay, let's have a go at the next example. This time we've got 9.7 minus 2.86. Now this time I am doing subtraction. So instead of adding, I'm going to be subtracting. So once again, I want to make sure I align my decimal point and also each of my digits in with the same place value. So here I'm just going to write a decimal point here for both of my numbers and just write in my number. The first one was 9.7 and the next one was 2.86, and I'm subtracting these two numbers together. Okay, because I'm subtracting, I'm going to start from the right and I'm going to move to the left, just like we did before. Now here, for this one, notice I've got nothing minusing 6. I can't actually do nothing minus 6. So what I need to do is I need to borrow a 10 from the previous one. So here, I'm actually going to borrow one of my, from my 7, because this 7 is the same as writing a 70, for example. And I'm going to borrow one from here, so I've got 6 left. And that means I've got a 10 here. So here, this is 10 minus 6. 10 minus 6 gives me 4. So when you're doing these, you need to make sure that the number at the top is bigger than the number at the bottom when you subtract, or else you're not going to be able to do this correctly. And if you need to, you can borrow numbers from the previous digit to help you do that. Okay, so now I've got 6 minus 8. I can't do 6 minus 8. 6 is smaller than 8, so I'm going to need to borrow a 10 from the previous one. So here, I'm going to borrow one. So I'm going to subtract 1 from the 9. That becomes an 8, and so this 6 becomes a 16. Okay, so let me just write this. So whenever I borrow, I'm just crossing out and taking 1 from the previous one. Okay, so I've got 16 minus 8, which I can do, which will give me an 8 point. And then now final one, 8 minus 2 will give me 6. So here, let me just check that with my calculator. I've got 9.7 minus 2.86, which gives me 6.84, which is exactly what I have here. So when you're adding and subtracting fractions, we're doing what we would normally do with regular 2 and 3 digit numbers when we're adding them, or even bigger numbers than that, whole numbers. But we're just making sure that the decimal point lines up, and also each of the digits with the same place value line up as well. So that is how we add and subtract add and subtract decimals. We just want to line up our numbers and make sure that they're in the correct spots. Okay, next thing that we want to do. Next thing we want to do is we want to actually multiply and divide by a power of 10. Now, just remember from last lesson, we talked about powers of 10. Powers of 10 are numbers where you've got 1 and a 0 behind it, or just a 1 by itself. So here, 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and so on. So here, these are examples of powers of 10. And so when we multiply and divide with powers of 10, there's actually a really nifty pattern that we're going to notice. So here, what we want to do, these are the steps that I want you guys to follow. The first thing is count the number of zeros in the power of 10. It tells you what power of 10 it is. So for example, if I've got 1,000, how many zeros does 1,000 have? Well, I've got 1 0, I've got 2 0, I've got 3 zeros. So that's 3 zeros. Okay, so that's the first step. Count the number of zeros. Then what we're going to do is we're going to just move the decimal point. We're going to move the decimal point to that number of units. So if I'm dividing or multiplying by 1,000, I'm going to move the decimal point 3 times. 3 times. And the direction that we move it in depends on what operation we're doing. Now, if we are dividing, we're going to move it to the left. So if we're dividing, we're going to move to the left. So we're going to move the decimal point that way if we are dividing. So this is for dividing. And if we're multiplying, we're going to move it to the right. So if we're multiplying, we'll move the decimal point that way to the right. So let's have a go at 2 examples of this. So here, let's have a go at these 2. The question here is we're going to calculate the following. So the first one, I've got 9.753 divided by 100. So first step, what we're going to do is we're going to count the number of zeros in my power of 10. So here, my power of 10 is 100. How many zeros do we have? Well, we've got 1 0, we've got 2 zeros. So that's 2 zeros. I'm going to need to move the decimal point twice. Now, which direction am I going to move it in? Well, because I'm dividing, I'm going to move it to the left. So because I'm dividing, I'm going to move it to the left. So here, I'm just going to write out my number, 9.753. I'm going to move the decimal point to the left twice. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw a little curly arrow. So here, I'm going to go move it once, and then I'm going to move it twice. And so the decimal point is now going to go here. Now notice there is one arrow. So this first arrow just moves it to the left of the 9. And then we've moved it again and there's this little hole gap here. If you see any gaps there, what you need to do is you need to fill it up with zeros. And so the final answer that we're going to get is, well, it's going to be 0.09753. 0.09753. Now, when we write numbers less than 0, we don't just write it as 0.09753. We're going to need to add that 0 before. And so that's how we can actually divide by a power of 10. Okay, let's have a go at the second example. We're going to do 27.58 times by 10,000. So once again, same steps as before. Count the number of zeros. So here, my 10,000 has 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 zeros. Second thing is then figure out which direction we need to go. Now, we are multiplying, which means I'm moving my decimal point to the right. So for this one, I'm going to write my number, 27.58, and I'm going to move it to the right. So here I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times. And once again, just like the previous example, we've got a couple of these like hops or like arrow bits where you've got no number above. If you've got no number above it, you need to just write a 0. So we're going to fill it in with zeros, and we're going to put the decimal point here. So this number just becomes 27,005. Oh, actually, let me just write it fully out and then read the number. 275,800. So that's 275,800. So that's how we multiply and divide by powers of 10. So the first step, count the number of zeros in your power of 10, and then figure out which direction we're going. If we're dividing, we're going to the left. If we're multiplying, we're going to the right. And so that is how we multiply by powers of 10. Okay, that's the next bit done. Third part of this is we want to be able to multiply with decimals. So when we are multiplying with decimals, there's a few steps we're going to follow. So first step, the things we're going to do when we're multiplying by decimals, we're going to do the same thing that you would normally do if you're multiplying whole numbers. So for example, if you're multiplying like 31 by 2, we would just multiply each of those digits starting from right to left individually, and then we would then make sure we carry over if we need to. So here 2 times 1 gives me 2, 2 times 3 gives me 6, so that gives me 62. We're going to do that, but here we're doing it with decimals. So here, these are the steps that you're going to do. First step, complete the multiplication pretending that there's no decimal places. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to write the two numbers, or two numbers. Yeah, I think it's 2 numbers. Yes. 2 numbers, pretending there's no decimal points. We're just going to do a regular multiplication first. Then the second step is then to count the number of decimal places in the number being multiplied, and then place the decimal point for the number of decimal places. So we're going to go through those 3 steps. So let's have a go at 2 examples of this. So first one, calculate 2.57 times 3. Now, let's actually go about doing this. So here, what the first step was complete the multiplication pretending that there's no decimal place. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write the first number as, instead of 2.57, that's just going to be 257, and we're going to multiply that by 3. Okay, so I'm just pretending that there's no decimal place here. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply, but this time we're starting, and just like we did when we were adding and subtracting, we're going to start from the right and we move to our left. So here I'm going to do 3 times 7. 3 times 7 gives me 21. So I'm going to write the 1 here, and I'm going to carry the 2 over. Then I'm going to go 3 times 5. So that was 3 times 7 gives me 21. Then I'm going to do 3 times 5. 3 times 5 gives me 15, but I need to add on that 2 that I carried over. So 15 plus 2 gives me 17, and I need to carry the 1 over from that 15, or 17. Then I do 3 times 2. And so 3 times 2 gives me 6. And then I need to add on that extra 1 here. So that 6 plus 1 gives me 7. So here I got 771. So that is just how I do the multiplication. So do your multiplication like you normally would do if you did long multiplication. Okay. The second step is then to count up the number of decimal places. So we want to count up how many digits there are that are after the decimal point in either of the 2 numbers. So here, if you have a look, well, I've got this 5, and I've also got this 7. I've got no decimal places in the 3, so I've only got 2 decimal places. So what that means is I'm just going to start from the end, and I'm just going to move 2 decimal places in. So here I've got 1 from the 1. So moving in from the end, I'm going to go 1 spot here and a second spot here. And I'm just going to put a decimal point here. So my final answer is, therefore, my final answer is 7.71. And we can check this on a calculator. So let's do 2.57 times 3, 7.71. Exactly what we expected. Okay, so that's how we actually do multiplication with decimals. Let's have a go at another example. Now, this one here, the two numbers both have decimals in it. So I've got 4.13 and 9.6. Once again, I'm going to do this multiplication pretending like there's no decimal places at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 413 times 96. So I'm going to pretend that there's no decimal places for now. Okay, so I'm just going to do this multiplication. Now, when you're multiplying a two-digit number, what you want to do is you multiply each of those digits separately. So I'm going to first start off with the 6. So I'm going to do 6 times 413. So here 6 times 3 gives me 18. I have to carry over the 1. And so when I carry over the 1, I do 6 times 1, which is 6. And I add on that 1, so that gives me 7. Then the final bit is I do 6 times 4, which gives me 24. And here I can just write 24. Okay. Now next bit is then I need to multiply the 9. Now when I multiply the 9, I'm not just multiplying by 9, am I? If you remember from last lesson when we talked about place value, that 9 actually represents 9 lots of 10. So that 9 actually represents 90. So what I want to do here when I'm doing the multiplication is I just want to add on a 0 at the end there. Because I'm multiplying by 10, I just want to put that 0 there just to remind myself that I'm multiplying by not just 9, but 90. Okay. And from there, I'm just going to start from this spot and do the multiplication like I did with the 6. So I'm going to do 9 times 3, which gives me 27. So I need to carry over the 2 here. So when I carry over the 2, 9 times 1 gives me 9, plus 2 gives me 11. So I'm going to write the 1 from the unit ones of the 11 and then carry over the 1. And then do 9 times 4, which gives me 36, plus that 1, 37. Okay. And now that I've done that, I'm just going to add these two numbers together. So when you're doing long multiplication, just remember you multiply each of those digits separately. And then after you've written all of those multiplications together, you add it. So here I'm going to have, when I add it, 8 in the first digit, we're moving right to left, just like we did before. 7 plus 7 gives me 14. I'm going to carry over the 1. 1 plus 4 plus 1 gives me 6. Here we've got 2 plus 7, which gives me 9. And the last one we've got 3. Okay, so that was the first step. We just multiply pretending like there's no decimal places at all. Then the second step is then to count up the number of decimal places there are with both of the numbers. So here I have a look at my two numbers. I've got one decimal place here, so the tenths column in my 4.13, then my hundredths column for the 3. Then my second number from 9.6, I've got that 6 in the tenths column. So what that means altogether, 1, 2, 3, I've got 3 decimal places. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the right and I'm going to go in 3 decimal places, 3 of my digits. So 8, 4, 6. And I'm going to put in the decimal point right after that. So my final answer is 39.648. And let's actually check this on my calculator. So I had 4.13 times 9. Let me try to put this 0.6. And when we put this in the calculator, we get 39.648, which is exactly what we have here. So that's how we multiply with decimals. What we want to do is we want to firstly pretend like there's no decimal places at all. So no numbers. Let me try that again. We're going to pretend that there's no decimal point there at all and just do regular long multiplication. Then from there, we just want to count up how many decimal places there are altogether in both of the numbers. Not just one of them, but both of them. Then once we've done that, once we've counted them up, we're just going to start from the right and then we move to the left, that number of decimal places, and we're just going to put the dot where it is, where we've counted. So that's how we multiply with decimals. The final bit is we're actually dividing with decimals. Now here, when we're dividing with decimals, what we're going to do is we're going to need to do long division. So hopefully you might remember from year 7, when we did long division, what we did was when we're doing long division, we're just going to start from left to right this time. 3, for example. And we just count up how many times each one of whatever we're dividing, so our divisor goes into each of our digits as we go from left to right. And if there's no whole number way that we can get into those digits, then we look at the next digit as well and we count up how many ways we can do that. So For the following steps, if you have a read here, follow these steps only if you're dividing with a number involving a decimal. So this is if the number that we're dividing by, so for example, in the two examples that we have below, this one here, the number that we're dividing by is 4. That does not have a decimal involved. So we don't actually need to apply these steps if we're doing that. We just do regular division. But for this one, 0.03, this one has a decimal point, and we need to follow the following steps. So dividing with a decimal. First step, move the decimal place so that the number you're dividing by no longer has a decimal. So we're going to just move the decimal point so that we don't have a decimal point anymore in our divisor. Then what we want to do is we want to match that with the number that we're dividing by. So move the decimal place of the other number that you are dividing by to match it. Then what we do is complete our regular division. Okay, so let's have a go at this. First one, calculate this following. So divide 35.756 by 4. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to need to do long division. So I'm going to set up my long division. I'm dividing by 4. I'm going to write outside my division symbol. I've got 35.756. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the left and I'm going to go to the right and see how many times 4 can divide into each of those numbers. So let's have a look here. Can 4 divide into 3? Well, 4 can't divide into 3 because 3 is smaller than 4. So I can't do that. So what I'm going to do is look at the whole number from here. So can 4 divide into 35? Yeah, it can. It can actually do that 8 times. So I'm going to write 8 above that, the right digit here. So 8 times 4 gives me 32. And so here, what I'm going to write here is 32. And what I want to do is then I want to subtract those two. So I've got 35 minus 32. That gives me a remainder of 3. Now here, the next point, we've got decimal points. So I need to actually put a decimal point in my answer as well. Now, can 4 go into 3? Once again, 4 can't go into 3. So what I need to do is I need to drop down the next digit. And I've got 37. Now, can 4 go into 37? Well, it can do that. It can do that 9 times because 4 times 9 gives me 36. So I'm going to write 36 underneath. And 37 minus 36 gives me 1 remainder. Okay. Can 4 go into 1? 4 can't go into 1, so I'm going to need to drop the next digit down into here. So here, let me just draw these arrows. So these arrows are just the steps these red lines are the steps I'm doing. The black is what I actually write down. So I need to drop down the next one. So I've got 15. Does 4 go into 15? Yeah, 4 goes into 15. How many times? It goes into 15 3 times. So 3 times 4 gives, so I'm going to write 3 at the top. 3 times 4 gives me 12, which means that I need to have a remainder of 3. I'm subtracting those two. 4 go into 3. Once again, no, so I need to drop down the next digit. And so here, this gives me 36. Does 4 go into 36? It does. It goes into 46 9 times. And here we are done because 4 times 9 gives me 36. And we are done. Okay, so here the final answer is 8.9. Therefore, 8.939. So we can check that answer. So we got 35.756 divided by 4. 8.939, which is exactly what we have here. Great. Okay, next example. Here, we've got 64.137 divided by 0.03. Now, this is an example that I was talking about. If we are dividing by a number that has a decimal point, what we're going to do is we're going to redo this division, but we're going to remove the decimal point from our number here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to write this as we're dividing, instead of dividing by 0.03, I'm just going to move the decimal point and move it so that it's out of this number there. So this means that I'm dividing by 3. So, but I'm going to move the decimal point. Now here, to get rid of it, I need to move it to the right 2 times. But because I do that to my number that I'm dividing by, I need to do that to the number that I'm dividing with. I need to do that to the number that I'm dividing by. So here, I need to do the same thing. Here, with my 64.137, I need to move the decimal point 2 to the right. And so here, I'm actually dividing 6413.7 and dividing that by 3. So once I've done that, excellent, I can just do my division. 6413, so 6413.7. Okay, let's do my steps here. So I'm going to start off with from the left. Can 3 divide into 6? Yeah, it can. It goes into 6 2 times. And you're left with 6, which won't give you anything when you subtract the 2. So remember, every one of these steps, we're actually subtracting. So here, I just write it here. We're subtracting at each one of these steps. Okay, we subtracted, so that means I've got nothing left over. And so what I need to do is just drop down the next one. So 4. Does 3 go into 4? Yeah, 3 goes into 4. How many times? It goes into 4 once. So I'm going to write here 3. And I'm going to subtract the 2. So when I subtract the 2, I get a remainder 1. Okay, the 3 go into 1. Unfortunately, 3 does not go into 1. So I'm going to drop down the next digit. And so here, I'm going to have 11. Does 3 go into 11? Yeah, 3 goes into 11. It goes into 11 3 times. So 3 times 3 gives me 9. And so it goes into 11 3 times. So I'm going to subtract those 2. 11 minus 9 gives me 2. Does 3 go into 2? Nope. So I'm going to drop down the next one. So I've got 23 here, and I'm going to try that again. Does 3 go into 23? Yeah, it does. It goes into 23 7 times. So 7 times 3 gives me 21. So here, I'm just going to subtract the 2. I've got 2 left. Now here, this is where my decimal point is. So I'm going to put the decimal point up above in my quotient here. Okay, final bit is, does 3 go into 2? That does not. So I need to drop down the next one. So I'm going to drop down to 7. Does 3 go into 27? Yeah, it goes into 27 9 times. 9 times 27. 9 times 3 gives me 27. And so I'm done here because it matches up. So here my final answer is 2,137.9. And so let's actually check that with my calculator. So 64.137 divided by 0.03 is my original question. And I get 2,137.9 as my answer. So that's how we go about doing calculations with decimals. So let's do a quick summary of what we did today. Today we looked at adding and subtracting decimals at the beginning. What we need to do is make sure we align our decimal points and also align each of our digits and just do regular long addition or subtraction. Then we went about dividing and multiplying and dividing by powers of 10. So here the steps were 2 steps. Count the number of zeros in your power of 10. Then move your decimal point either to the left if you're going dividing, or to the right if you're multiplying by the number of zeros that were in your power of 10. Then the next thing that we did was we multiplied by decimals. So what we did first was we treated the multiplication as if there was no decimals. So we did long multiplication first. Then once we've done that, we're going to count up the number of decimal places in both of the numbers, and just put in the decimal point at the correct spot. Then the final thing that we did was just dividing. And so here we had to do our long division. And if we had a decimal, what we had to do was we had to move the decimal point in to the right, and just so we can get rid of the decimal, and we had to do that the same for the other number. So hopefully that helped. And if you have any question, as always, year 8s, you can ask me or send me an email or send a comment on Google Classroom. And I'm always happy to help you guys as best I can. But until next lesson, year 8s, hopefully you're staying safe wherever you are. And I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.